before me have said, it is a huge privilege to be here this afternoon on International Women's Day. I'm going to start by just talking a little bit about myself, and then there's a theme, you will have picked it up. There's 3 things that each of us are trying to give you, 3 things that you take away. And then what I'm doing, what I'm committing to do today and going forward for as long as I'm blessed to be here on this planet, that I will continue to commit my life to in terms of breaking the bias. So a little bit about me. So as this diagram shows, to do justice to my career journey, I need to go back quite some time to the roots of my career because they lie in my childhood, in my early childhood. And actually from an early age, I remember very clearly being engaged in thinking that went something like this. Why does that friend of mine behave like that at school? And then why does somebody else behave like that, quite differently, to seemingly the same event? And I was perplexed by that, but also deeply curious about it from a very early age, and that stayed with me. That stayed with me as I remember all too clearly seeing some children in the playground being really quite nasty to a little gangly, red-headed, freckly-faced child, and other children perhaps seeing beyond that, but behaving very differently to that same child. And as I lived through my teens, I continued to be fascinated and perplexed by why we behave the way we do as human beings. And that stayed with me. But also, at the same time, I succumbed to the all too common state, like so many others, and that was a complete lack of self-confidence. And if I can borrow Sarah's line, I'm standing here today, and that's the first time I've ever declared that publicly. Outwardly, I was the sporting captain of my school, and I was leading us to victory. But inwardly, I was that awkward, freckle-faced, red-headed child that today, as I looked towards the prom I was going to attend, I didn't have a date. And I could never understand that. But fast forward 3 years, and it was my wedding day. And I sat down quietly on my wedding day. Yep, I did actually get that date. And I sat down and I thought, what am I actually doing here? And I thought, I'm about to get married. I'm about to get married to somebody that I don't love. And I remember getting ready, and I remember my dad coming, and I remember arriving at the church, and I remember standing outside the church, and I remember my dad, who clearly sensed something was wrong, took me by the arm and said, Linny, which is what he calls me, you know, Linny, we can always turn around and walk away. And in that moment, you've probably guessed the outcome. I changed the direction of my life. I chose to do what for me was the right thing. I chose to follow my purpose. And my purpose was to study psychology, to understand in a more rigorous way what I'd always been fascinated with, which is why we do the things that we do. And how do we, in a more accurate way, predict behavior? So I reclaimed my purpose that I'd strayed from for 3 years, and I then spent the next several years studying psychology, initially clinical psychology and working in that space for over a decade, forensic psychology, and then organizational psychology. I went on to establish PeopleWise, as Deborah said, which is a consultancy based in London, where we look at talent management, talent assessment, leadership development. And I continue today to lecture in the Master's Program of Psychology at the University of Hertfordshire, and I'm a researcher at Bond University in Australia, which some of you may have guessed is my accent. So throughout my career, my guiding purpose has remained the same: to deepen understanding of why we do the things we do, to deepen understanding around human potential and methods that enable us to predict that. So we know, and that is my first learning, we know that purpose gives us a sense of self. We know that purpose can be our North Star, and yet all too often we don't have that sense of purpose. What gives your life meaning? Take a moment just to think about that and the enormity of the question. Tracey Emin, the renowned artist, has just been nominated to be Art Icon. Why is that? She is my role model when it comes to confidence, and she has stood true to her purpose. Her art may be controversial, but she, with confidence and dignity, has stayed true to her love and her passion for art. And as women, today, as we think about breaking the bias, we can learn from role models like Tracey Emin. So think about your purpose and think about what gives your life meaning. That allows me to go through to the second learning that I want to share. And that second learning is about confidence. We have all learned a lot, particularly in the last decade, about confidence or lack of it. And as women in particular, we are very skilled at giving ourselves a vote of no confidence. We are very good, and you've heard from some of my colleagues here, we are very good at overthinking things and undermining ourselves. We are very good at being overcritical. Excuse me. We are very good at playing it safe. We are very good at being overquiet, and we are very good at being overcautious. Just think of the language that you hear people use, typically women. I'm just a ... I only do this ... The language we use diminishes us. So what I would propose is that we think about the 5 laws of confidence. Strip away the 5 laws of no confidence. Give yourself a vote of confidence, because if you don't, nobody else will. It starts with you, and I've heard that from all of my colleagues. We are the authors of our future. So choose to act. Choose to praise. And not just yourself, but others. There's a wonderful quote that I use, who's another role model, Madeleine Albright, former Secretary of State. And she said, "There is a special place in hell for every woman who doesn't support other women." And we don't. I was speaking to a colleague this morning in Singapore, and the colleague had been on a conference last week, and it was virtual. So you could go into virtual rooms and have discussions. And at this conference, there was one of the rooms which was for women. So it's anecdotal, but here's what happened. A number of men virtually came into the room and asked themselves, could we join in? And off they went, and they joined in. Every woman that went to get admission into that room did the metaphorical knocking on the door and asked for permission to get into the room. So that's one difference. And then the most striking difference, one woman didn't knock. One woman just went straight in. And she was vilified by the other women. They criticised her for not knocking. If you recognise that, if you are permission-seeking, or if you are critical of those that share your sex, think about how you can break the bias. Which leads me on to my third learning. I have learned over the years something that I am passionate about. Language matters. This is audience participation time. What do you see on the slide? What is the image you see? Yell it out. Inspection cover. Thank you. It is an inspection cover. We call it...
As a counsellor.
Yay! Thank you. And I did not pay this counsellor to say that. It is an inspection cover, and yet we continue to perpetuate the bias by calling it a manhole. Language matters. Nearly 5% of our language in the English language has a straight sex bias. It is language that was developed by men for men, and manhole is just the beginning. 43rd word in the English language that is spoken is man. Woman, the word, doesn't come in the first 500. We have got to break the bias. We have got to disrupt. And I'm with my colleagues that say, it has got to be now. I love that we've got to break the bias because actually it's much more of an action. We cannot be passive anymore. And my commitment is absolutely that every day I tune in to my language and every day I tune into others. And I respectfully repeat words, but I repeat them in a gender-neutral way. Tune into yourselves, listen to the language that you continue to repeat that has a gender bias, and let's break the bias. Let's stop making half the planet invisible. And so, in the words of Summer Artman, let's stop talking about women playing sport and just talk about athletes doing what they love. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deborah. Well, hi, everyone. I am absolutely thrilled to be here celebrating International Women's Day in person with you all. I think particularly because the past few years have made it really difficult to meet in person. It feels really special when we're allowed to celebrate with one another face to face. So as Deborah said, I am currently the co-founder of Leap Impact. We're an employment tech startup focused on making connections between businesses and job seekers easier, more efficient, and most importantly, more meaningful. Before diverging into the private sector, I worked really extensively in the public sector, working on women's policy issues, so predominantly through research and through advocacy work. So I'm really excited to share with you some research, some thoughts on how we can all break the bias, and some of my own professional experiences. So I come from a small rural town outside of Portland, Oregon. For those of you who might not be familiar, that's on the west coast of America. Think cowboy hats and tumbleweeds. And growing up, I can still remember distinctly the first time that I was told that I couldn't do something because of my gender. So I was 10 years old, I was in the 5th grade, and I decided that I wanted to run for class president. I was really excited. I announced my candidacy, and pretty shortly thereafter, the boys in my class told me that I couldn't run for class president because I was a girl, and that was impossible. And for a while, I felt like there were these sort of invisible barriers or walls that kind of came up around me in that moment and confined me to a particular set of rules and regulations that I hadn't really known that existed before. And so I did end up running, and I did end up winning, thank you very much. But for a while, I seriously considered dropping out because I thought, you know what, maybe they're right, maybe this is something that I just can't do. And this, along with a lot of other moments in my life, really sort of planted the seed that made me become really interested in bias and how it can impact the reality of women's lives in really complex ways. Ooh, that's me. So Iris Marion Young, she's a feminist philosopher and researcher, explores how bias can impact individuals in her seminal work, Throwing Like a Girl. In this, she explores the difference in how young boys and young girls, at an age when their strength is relatively different, throw a ball. And what she finds is that the young boys put their entire body movement behind the motion of throwing the ball, whereas girls tended to limit the motion to their arm alone. And what she found is that these girls weren't throwing the ball as far as boys because they weren't strong enough to do so, but rather it was because they had the perception that they weren't as strong as boys to throw the ball as far, which restricted the way that they moved their body and restricted the way that they chose to throw the ball, which made it go less of a distance. In other words, the expectations of society that women have, so things like girls are fragile, girls are dainty, girls are weak, can have real physical impacts on how people move throughout the world. Another example we can see of this is maybe on the commute to work, and we see a gentleman doing what's been coined mansplaining here in the photo. And we see that he's physically taking up a lot of space, and the two women on either side of him are physically compressing themselves, making themselves more compact to accommodate that. And really what I want to illustrate here is that the beliefs and biases within a given society, whether they're conscious or unconscious, can and do have real world impacts. So those invisible barriers, those walls that I felt out come around me at a really young age, at a really young girl, can impact the way that I move throughout the world. They can present barriers to me that might not exist to other people. These walls, and my experience of them, is ultimately why I became really interested in bias, and I wanted to pursue a career in research and advocacy. So I left my small conservative town and I moved to Seattle to go to university. If anyone knows, Seattle is very big, very liberal, so it was quite an adjustment to me at a young age. I majored in political science and international studies with a focus on gendered issues, and I often describe learning about feminism and learning about gender studies as learning a new language because it gave me the vocabulary to articulate experiences that I had had in my past and had never had words to put to them. I've been fortunate enough to be able to have worked in the advocacy and research sphere for a while. So as Deborah mentioned, I was able to work at the United States Senate, the National Women's Law Center, along with a lot of other advocacy organizations in multiple countries. But I kept seeing conscious and unconscious biases producing really real barriers for women, particularly for women in the workplace. So some of the barriers that women continue to experience are things like likability politics. So a recent UK study found that 43% of female employees have directly experienced being judged more negatively than their male counterparts for exhibiting the exact same behavior. This can obviously impact women's ability to move up within an organization, for them to get promoted. 77% of working mothers have experienced promotional discrimination as a result of their childcare responsibilities. And 31% of Black and minority ethnic women report being passed over or denied a promotion. Continuously seeing statistics like these in my research, I really felt compelled to move beyond the realm of policy and to try to make a direct impact within the business sector itself. That led me to co-found my company, Leap. So we match businesses and job seekers across things like diversity and inclusion, social impact, environmental sustainability, avenues for advancement, Ultimately, our mission is to drive more transparent workplace practices through the job search and recruitment process so that people can end up in spaces where they're not facing these institutional barriers. And through my work in this, I have seen that there have been immense positive changes within the business world for women. There's more representation than ever before. So in the past couple of years alone, there's been a 29% increase in women in senior leadership positions, which is massive. 87% of global mid-market companies have at least one woman in a senior management role as of 2020. We're also seeing that the younger generations of job seekers and people entering the workforce are demanding that companies take action on things like diversity and inclusion, and it's driving change within these companies themselves. So I'm extremely optimistic and hopeful that as we continue to progress forward as a society, the barriers that women have traditionally faced within the workplace will continue to dissipate. So as I conclude, I'd like to leave you all with 3 pieces of advice on how I think we can all work together to break the bias. Driving change starts with all of us. So my first piece of advice is to talk about those invisible barriers that you've come up against in your own life. Talk about them with your friends, your family, your coworkers, whoever you're comfortable with. When we talk about these experiences, we're able to connect with other people who've shared that experience, and we can start to challenge these biases with support. Additionally, when we talk about these things, we bring them to light and we can educate others who may not have experienced these barriers and produce more advocates. The second thing is that for those of us who have more privilege as a result of our gender, our race, our sexuality, and so on, or for those of us who are in positions of authority, we have even more of a requirement to be standing up and talking about these biases when we see them happen. It's not the responsibility for people who are the most institutionally impacted by bias to challenge these things on their own. So we have to be standing up and saying something when we see it happening. So the next time your coworker is interrupted or maybe their idea isn't heard, stand up for them and be an advocate for them in that specific scenario. Finally, and on a personal note, develop your support system. As women in business, we're inevitably going to continue to face barriers, and these things can really wear us down. When we're worn down, we're not able to show up for ourselves or for others, which is why it's so important to create a community of people who can support you. As a female founder of a startup, I've certainly experienced many more barriers as I've moved forward with my career. And I have an amazing ecosystem of both men and women who will support me and help me through these challenging times, even if it's just letting me complain to them about something someone said to me at work. Ultimately, I think the biggest thing that I've learned through my years working in research and advocacy, and also now trying to tackle some of these gendered issues within the workplace, is that amazing things happen when we come together and we support one another to move through these challenges, which is why it feels really special to be able to be here on this International Women's Day with everyone here, sharing our stories and connecting with each other so that we can all work together to break the bias. Thank you.
Hard act to follow, Cassie. Thank you for that introduction, Deborah, and what an absolute privilege it is to be here today with you all on International Women's Day. I get to do what I love every single day, and I get paid to do it. And that's not by accident. I've actually engineered my life to be this way despite all the odds, and I'm going to be sharing some of those with you today. As Deborah said, my name is Babita Devi and I'm a growth coach. I have my own coaching company where I work directly with business owners, but also I am the Innovation Director at the Epicentre part-time, which is part of Oxford Innovation's network of centres around the UK. I'm a coach for the Judge Business School on the Accelerate programme, and we've got about 60 companies going through that programme at the moment, of which Cassie is one. I am so proud of you, Cassie. I'm a mentor for Barclays Eagle Labs across all of their centres across the UK, and I'm an advisor to a VC investment fund as well as a board advisor. It's a lot, right? And yet, despite that long list, I haven't mentioned the most important job of all. I'm a mother to two beautiful girls, and yeah, they were involved in this speech today, so if it's not good, you can complain to them. But my journey that I've been on, that I want to share with you today, is as much about the life that I wanted to create for myself as it was about the desire I had to lead by example for them. I love seeing transformation in people, and it's what gets me out of bed in the morning. As well as those two girls I mentioned, and a crazy dog. Last year, I worked with 100 companies, and that's a lot. But you know, what I'd like to share with you today is my journey of transformation that I went through in the hope that I can inspire you as well. So, let's just press that. So there was a time in my life when I couldn't actually work out how to step into my own greatness, and I didn't even know how to speak up for myself. And so much of how we show up on a daily basis actually stems from our childhood. My parents were immigrants from India, and they were very young when they moved to the UK, and then they married in the UK. And by the time they were in their early 20s, they had all 5 of us. With such a large family, they were barely able to make ends meet, and this put a huge strain on my parents. So at the age of 14, I took my first job in a sewing factory. And I haven't stopped working since, except for momentarily to have my 2 daughters. And in fact, show of hands here for every woman who's only ever stopped to take a break from work because they've had children. So my ambitions took a backseat for a while, and yes, I had a list of them. And the first one was that I wanted to go to university, but my parents couldn't afford this. And so I was married at the age of 20, and it was arranged, in fact. But at that time is when I entered the corporate world, and I started working for an IT company in their marketing department. And I was involved in setting up the very first computer superstore in the UK, which got bought out by PC World and then Currys. And I climbed the corporate ladder really quickly. By the time I was 24, I was marketing manager. By the time I was 25, I was managing a marketing budget of £800,000. And I continued to work in corporate for many years, and I very quickly moved to a European marketing role as well. And then in 2003, I decided to move my family to Australia. And at that point, rather than go and take an employed job, I actually created my marketing company. And that was my second ambition, to become my own boss. And the timing was perfect because I had a young child. So I lived in Australia for a while. That got too difficult because I missed my family immensely. And so after 3 years, I moved back to the UK. I continued to grow my business, a marketing consultancy, and I eventually found myself really supporting and mentoring the business owners. So I kind of fell into coaching and marketing. I fell into coaching and mentoring, and I loved being able to join up the dots for the business owners, but also help them with their journey of personal growth. And it was during this time that I was invited to give a lecture at Anglia-Ruskin University. Can you imagine the dread that went through me to think about going and lecturing at university, having never studied there? I remember walking into the lecture theatre, not too dissimilar to this one, and standing up front, as I am today, and started to question, who am I to be doing this? How have I ended up here? Fear, criticism, judgment, it was all going on inside my head. But then I realised that, hold on, I've been invited here because I have real world experience. You know, I have valuable insights to share. And that first lecture was amazing. In fact, I still continue to keep in touch with some of the students from that course. And that day I realised that stepping outside of my comfort zone was allowing me to achieve my ambition, okay, going to university, albeit as a lecturer, not as a student. But I didn't stop there. I went on to lecture entrepreneurial marketing at Lincoln Business School. And in fact, this morning, I've just come off a session with mentoring for Bath University as part of their sustainability workshop week that they have going on. But why stop there? For a right brain creative, I thought, why not go extremely left brain? Some of you might get that. I decided to set up a technology business with no knowledge of software. I set about learning how to code, how to manage developers, how to raise investment, how to build an app for an app that was for parents on school-related matters. And with my And with my marketing hat on, it's no surprise that I was out there building relationships with stakeholders, talking to as many people as I could, and also positioning the product for schools as well. But there was a problem. The problem is that I consistently had an issue with trying to get the product out on time. Even though my developers were doing a great job in developing the product, I wasn't prepared to launch it unless it was absolutely perfect. Again, who resonates with that? So rather than launch something that was 95% ready, I kept trying to get to the 100%. So actually I was getting in my own way of launching that app. But nonetheless, I'd been making the promises, and so the sleepless nights began. I couldn't let people down, and I began to relate my own self-worth, measure myself by everything that was going wrong, rather than anything that was going right. I saw more limitations than I saw possibility, and I was really heavily invested at this stage, both emotionally and financially. The reason for sharing this is because it's from here that I had my breakthrough. I've been refusing to see the greatness in any of what I was offering. Instead, I wasn't measuring myself on my perseverance, my tenacity, my determination. I'd been living inside the fear of failure, and also fear of success. I realised that creating a tech business was really about pushing my boundaries, and I had the realisation that this journey was not about some destination, but about the growth that I needed to go through. I made the hardest decision of all to close my tech business and just do the thing that brought me the greatest joy, which was my coaching work. But to be honest, without this experience, I could never truly understand the entrepreneur's journey, the challenges, the sleepless nights. And that's why today I spend my time coaching others to help them step into their greatness in the hope that they can go on and do the same for others. Creating a coaching company has certainly been my safe space, and creating a tech company was really my growth space. And I'm truly grateful for every experience that has got me here. Coaching female founders is something that's very near and dear to my heart. And so I'm playing out my third ambition, which is to coach people into being the best version of them that they can be. It's my absolute privilege to help people to step into their journey of transformation. And I'm finally qualified from the School of Life to do that. So being able to share my story with you today has been an absolute honour. I hope that in some way it's inspired you to grow. And I'd like to finish off by giving 3 pieces of advice. First of all of the growth happens in the places that you are most uncomfortable. So just step into that growth. I continuously stepped outside of my comfort zone with the biggest risk of all in creating a technology company. Secondly, turn down the volume on the inner critic, because we only are limited by what we believe is possible for us. In fact, fear is when we give away our power to something that we think might happen in the future. And I'm going to repeat that because I really want you to hear it. Fear is when we give away our power to something that we think might happen in the future. If I'd stayed in fear, I would never have lectured at university. And thirdly, become unstoppable in your life mission. My mission is to transform every single person I coach. And it's important, for every woman in this room to realise that you actually have a choice. So I invite you to break the bias around what you believe is possible for you. It's your day, it's your time, and it's your opportunity. No one can do this but you. Because why not you? And why not now? And what's holding you back? Thank you.
I have to say, in amongst all those things, I've also got massive imposter syndrome now. I'm just being sat there going, oh my God, they're so brilliant. What am I going to say? So, anyway, I'm going to make a confession before I start. I'm a bit tired and emotional. And by the time I get to my third slide, you'll see why, and I'll probably break down a little bit. But I was thinking, it's so great to be out talking to people again, and women. And it's International Women's Day, and I don't even know, well, I know a few people here, I don't really know many of you. But I was coming on the train from London this morning, I was thinking, I feel so emotional, like I know all these people, and I'm probably going to cry. So if I do, I'll try and keep it at the end, and then I'll leave the stage. Anyway, the journey thing, so Babita said, 30 years experience, oh my God, that's showing my age. I've got 25 years experience in industry, because it took me ages to get going, which I'll tell you about in a minute. So I'm 50-something now. I'm 50-something. I was so pleased to hear that. We need to move from desperation to celebration, because I've had enough. I have had enough. You talked about man-spreading. I'm 53, and I get, come and let me give you the benefit of my experience. I'm nearly bloody retired. I'm fine, thank you. I always listen, but really? So my journey, and I'm a civil engineer, I'm a civil structural engineer. I don't know whether I actually ever really chose it, because when I was born obviously, but my dad was a builder, and I was brought up around building sites, and I loved it. And this was the 70s, so my dad was quite enlightened. Both my parents were quite enlightened, or I was a bit of a handful and they just let me do what I wanted. Because we never spoke about whether I was a boy or a girl. In fact, it was a bit of a shock to me to find out that there would be this differentiation. And as I was on the train also, I was thinking, I wish I'd done more research and I could give all these facts, and it's not fair, and all of this bias, and I don't want girls to be conditioned to think that they're not as good and big, as strong as boys. Well, in fact, you've got to break the bias. I like that one as well, because we're tough. And it was a shock. I got a tool set. I was never pressured into having dolls. I was allowed to go to work, literally go to work. Health and safety wasn't what it is now in those days. I was taught how to climb ladders. My sister had dolls. I made the dolls' furniture, age whatever I was. Well, one of my first experiences, actual real experiences in construction, was falling through a floor because I was testing to see how strong it was. I became a structural engineer afterwards. I know that is not the way that you do these kind of experiments. But seriously, and I was thinking about bias as well. There's gender bias. There's other kinds of bias. When I was a kid, I was quite good at school until I got to the age of about 12, which was where I realised I was a girl. There was a difference. All these horrible hormone things happened, and I stopped performing at school. And I was lost for quite a few years because it wasn't, I wasn't me anymore. And my friends had jobs, Saturday jobs. So I was like, Dad, I'm not working with you. I'm not doing this building stuff anymore. I'm gonna be a girl. I'm doing girl things. I'm getting a Saturday job in a clothes store that I won't name because I could maybe sue them now. So I go for my Saturday job interview, and I think I shone at the interview. I've shone at a lot of interviews. I didn't get the job, and I found out later I didn't get the job because I was from the rough council estate down the road. So you've got multiple bias piled on bias. I was the first person in my family to go to university. I didn't want to go to university. We brought up a really close-knit family in the back of beyond. There wasn't tumbleweed because it was raining and the tumbleweed couldn't tumble. It was stuck to the ground. I mean, literally, just nowhere. But I knew something wasn't right because I was allowed to go to work with my dad and do all this great stuff. But I see my mother, she was stuck at home with me and my sisters. Ugh. My auntie was stuck at home with my cousins. My other auntie was stuck at home with her cousins. And me and my sister used to talk about this when we were kids, and we'd go, I'm not doing that. I'm not having kids. Because you know what? They ruin your life. But it seems to be, that's what happens. So we used to go, well, if I have kids, I'm calling one of mine Fridge, because that'll ruin its life and serve it right for ruining mine. So my kids were going to be called Fridge and Wednesday. And then, but nowadays, these kids' names have changed, haven't they? One of my niece's friends is called Autumn. I was like, really? Did her mother not want to have kids or something? So anyway, they'd say, my teachers would go, oh, she's an academic, she's going to have to go to university. And I was like, no way. That's more than 100 miles away. How am I going to get there? I'm not going to university. You're not treating me like this experiment. So between 12 and 21 actually, 12 and 21, my life was just this massive confusion. I couldn't be me anymore. I carried on building. Somehow or other, I managed to carry on doing that. I like a beer. I still like a beer, but you shouldn't be drinking like I did when you're a teenager. I messed up. Oh, well, I'm saying I messed up. I managed to turn away from everything I loved. I somehow stayed at school, and I got A-levels in English, French, and geography. I mean, what the hell use is that to a civil engineer? Quite a lot, it turns out, at the end. But at that time, I was going nowhere. So age 21, I was like, oh, mother, I'm going to have to do something about this. I'm going to go, for those of you who come from the UK, you might laugh at this, because I said, I'm going to go to the massive city of Preston. And I'm going to learn to be an engineer. So I did a foundation year in engineering. At the end of it, they said, oh, that's brilliant. You can go and be a mechanical engineer. I said, but I don't want to do that. I want to do bridges and dams. And actually, I think water's really important, and we should have water and sewage before we have machinery. So I don't want to do that. So because I was the first person to go to university in the family, somebody said to me, Sarah, you want to be a civil engineer, that's what you want to do. And by the way, it's very vocational, that, so get yourself off to a polytechnic. So off I went to a polytechnic, and I graduated in 2000 and something, who am I? I graduated in 95. For a change, the construction industry was in a bit of a mess. And funnily enough, I graduated. I'd got back into gear by then. I realised, I was quite academic. I managed to get a first-class degree and a bunch of prizes. And I was like, hello, world. Hello, here I am. And I'm not going back into construction, because by that time, I know how to build stuff. I've been climbing around on building sites for bloody years now. I got massive muscles. I got segs on my hands. Can't get a boyfriend. And I want to stay inside in the warm. So I'm going to go to one of these fancy consultants. Would they look at me? Would they heck? Because I hadn't gone to the Red Brick University. So somebody said to me, Sarah, you could do a PhD, and I'm going to proudly show my ignorance here. And I went, a PhD? What the heck's that? You could be a doctor? No, I've studied engineering, I can't be a doctor. But it turned out, it's this PhD, this Doctor of Philosophy. Oh, that sounds all right. So for some reason, I like concrete. So I finished my degree, and I went to do a PhD at the University of Birmingham, a bit of the old lecturing thing. And at age 26, I found myself stood in a room like this, probably feeling as intimidated as I do now, and lecturing, and it was good. And I was starting to get into my groove, and I don't know whether, who remembers the 90s? I used to wear, in the 90s, in fact, I dressed a bit like I do now. I've been through all various other phases in between, but my friends, they all happened to be men, and I didn't really notice, why are they all men? But we would go out socialising together. I didn't feel pressured to dress like a woman or do anything that was specifically feminine. I could just be me. The music was different. I rode the mountain bike, and I thought, like, this whole sexism thing, it's all over. It's all over. Until, though, we try and get ourselves to a place where we change in the industry. Now, we're still at it. Tom, Steve there, we're still trying to change the industry. When I worked at the University of Birmingham, I'd get wheeled out because I'm woman in engineering, woman in construction. Oh my God. I did go through a bit of a rebellious phase where I'd say, it's not my fault. My gender is not my fault. But now I know it's so different. In fact, I'm going to flip the slides. Who did I say that to? I'll go backwards and then I'll go forwards and everything will be fine. No, me, 50-something, and since I was 25, since I first got wheeled out to do admissions at the University of Birmingham and said, we've got 10%, yay, we've got 10% females on our course now. I've been being the change I want to see, but we're running out of time. And look at those statistics. You know, we've got 15% of the entire workforce in UK construction is represented by women. And in trades, it's 1%. Well, I can tell you, I am not the only woman who likes to use tools and wield a hammer. I still do that at the weekend. I've got my own digger now. I dig stuff at the weekends. And I think that, you know, it was only, like, Cassie's an expert in this. But the thing that I thought we could really make a change by the way we recruit people. I thought building spaghetti bridges isn't the way forward. We've been doing safety messages at work that talk about you know, let's recruit differently, let's listen to people, let's make everybody's voices heard. But really, this is the bit where I'm going to cry. This little builder here, so this isn't me, 50 years later, 51 and a half years later actually, another Williamson builder pops into the world. And it was only, this is my niece, because Fridge and Wednesday stuck with me and I never had kids. But you know, the stuff Cassie was talking about and the walls that were built around you and the stuff Babita was talking about, it was only a few years ago I heard some research and oh my God, it broke my heart. It really did. That these little girls, aged 2 and 3, kids hanging around together, no, gender is just not a thing. And by the time they're age 6, by the time they are 6, so by the time we're recruiting people for a job, it's too late. By the time they are age 6, the die is cast and the little girls start to step back, you know. And it just cannot. She's a chip off the old block. This was her building on Sunday. And I just cannot, we can't let, by the time this little girl grows up, not by the time she even grows up, by the time she's 6, it's got to change. I just can't bear the idea that she'll change from being proud of her little, mind you, structurally it's a bit rubbish, we'll have a word about that later. I just can't bear the idea that she'll step back. And it's really interesting, this whole, you know, the man-spreading thing. When I was thinking about what's my advice, and it's advice I give to myself, like when I'm going, oh my God, I don't think I can do this, I don't think I can do this. I imagine this red light of confidence. And one thing that gives me hope as well, I see that 1% of females on site. I've started to see women on site, not just being on site, owning the place. Like, you know, this is my site, this is my territory, this is my job. And I think it's a piece of advice. It's not going to work for everybody, but it really works for me. As women, we need to learn that thing. We need to own our space. And a really good book called The Authority Gap, up until the point where it says women don't swagger. Well, I tell you, they do. And that's what we need to do. We need to stand up. We need to be proud, swagger, be those role models, and make sure that little girl keeps building. Thank you.
So as women, it is our responsibility to speak up in every single room we walk into, that we can do better. It's our job because we as a society have created this problem.